but let me go ahead with the business at hand. And today's guest is from a far and distant land to our east, about 607 miles to be specific, where English is rarely spoken. And what starts there comes to an end in Cairo, Illinois, and that's the Ohio River. Peterson's heritage springs from his storied hometown of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and that carries linguistic, historic, and sporting ramifications. Pete has long been a friend to Herrin history, and 14 years ago, when it was determined that a pictorial history would be part of Herrin's centennial, I contacted Pete for his input on Ray Chapman, and his essay is forever a part of 100 Years of Herrin, which is the pictorial booklet that I did for the centennial 14 years ago. Upon arriving in Carbondale in 1969, he was asked for an interview by a linguistics student as a result of his dialect. He indignantly told the curious student he had no dialect. She then asked him to say the name of the nation's capital city. He said Washington. She again pressed for an interview, and while he's here to talk baseball, perhaps we can prevail upon him to delight us with a little bit of Pittsburghese before he leaves. With Irish literature as his specialty, Pete taught for decades in the Department of English at SIU, retiring only a dozen years ago. So it's a rare pleasure to introduce someone who is equally knowledgeable and well-versed in the myth and metaphor of James Joyce as in the change-ups and knucklers of Bob Gibson. But in retirement, Pete has been particularly prolific proponent of baseball, creating WSIU Radio's Reading Baseball series, as well as writing and editing books on baseball, including the Pirates Reader and the St. Louis Baseball Reader, which is a great resource for anybody who is a Cardinals and a Browns fan. He has also written on topics of particular interest to his younger days in baseball, namely Pops, the Willie Stargell story, and growing up with Clemente. Ladies and gentlemen, Pete Peterson.
First of all, I'd like to thank Gordon, a very good friend, who made so many arrangements for this session. I do appreciate that. And to show my thanks to Gordon, I've asked him to stand in for Ray Chapman in a demonstration of why that pitch was so dangerous. He's agreed to do that, and I also asked him to stand in for Ray Fosse. Because I also like to show you why what Pete Rose did in the 1970 All-Stars game was indeed deliberate. So, Gordon, be prepared to be thrown at and run over before the occasion is over. I'd like to thank the Historical Society for the invitation. I'm in awe of what you do historically. I'm an amateur at this, and I mentioned to Gordon that as much as possible, I'd like this to be an open forum, because I have a good bit of baseball to share with you, but I really don't have the background that you have in this area. I'm from Pittsburgh, and Gordon talked about Pittsburghese. I grew up in a section of Pittsburgh called the South Side, and that's Pittsburghese because the South Side was a working class area of Pittsburgh, and pronouncing it South Side instead of South Side is particularly appropriate because there was a beer joint on every corner of the working class South Side, so having South instead of South tells you a bit about the dialogue. It's a very peculiar language. We've got a great deal of stuff to deal with. It's famous for some rather odd words like neppy for somebody who's too nosy. Jumbo for bologna because it was sold in the big rings rather than little rings, so you never ask bologna for bologna, you would ask for jumbo. So it's odds and ends. And if you want to be bored more by this, I'd gladly share some more of this later on. I have some things I'd like to pass out and have you look at as we start things. This is a very famous photograph. Don't worry about not being able to see it because I'm going to start passing it around. This was taken in 1939. The election of members to the Baseball Hall of Fame began in 1936, but the Hall of Fame wasn't constructed and didn't open until 1939. So this photograph was taken in 1939 at Cooperstown, and it's a photo of the surviving members who are going to be inducted into the Hall of Fame, beginning in 1936 and up to 1939. As you can see, there weren't many surviving members, but the Hall of Fame was very, very exclusive at this point. If you'd like to do this as a pop quiz, I could pass this around and see how many of these players you can recognize on this photo. You won't be able to miss this really big fellow in the middle. If ever a player was going to get in the middle on this picture, it was going to be Babe Ruth. So you simply can't miss him. But if you look at this photo, you might be able to identify the second baseman that Ray Chapman began his career playing with. He's in this photo. You might be able to identify the manager of that Cleveland Indians team in 1920. He's in that photograph. You might be able to identify the winningest pitcher in the major leagues who pitched for the St. Louis Cardinals. Briefly, but he did pitch for the St. Louis Cardinals. You may be able to recognize the greatest player who ever donned the St. Louis Browns uniform. He's in this photograph, and he challenged Ty Cobb again and again for the batting title in the American League. You may be able to identify one of the members of the 1919 Chicago White Sox team who wasn't a Black Sox. He's in this photo as well. And you may even find a Pittsburgh Pirate in this photograph. So I'll just pass it along, and at some time when it comes back, we'll identify the players. This is a town ball. If you want to know what they were swinging at and throwing around in the 1840s when baseball began, this is it. It's a very soft ball. And I mentioned to Gordon that in the early days of baseball, if you wanted to get a batter out, and this is greatly ironic when you consider what happened to Ray Chapman, if you wanted to get a batter out in town ball, how did you do it? She knows because she played town ball at Cooperstown. How'd they get them out, Anita?
Got hit with the ball.
You were soaked. It was called soaking. You could catch a ball on a bounce, that was as good as catching a fly ball, but if you had the throw runner out, you hit him with the ball. So you want to see this is what hit Ray Chapman with him. It's autographed by Hal Smith from West Frankfort. He is the only Pittsburgh Pirate on the list that we passed around. Hal Smith hit the most dramatic home run in World Series history, and his fame lasted one inning. In the bottom of the 8th inning, with the Pirates losing to the New York Yankees, he hit a 3-run home run. They gave the Pirates the lead. If they'd have held the lead in the 9th inning, he would have been hailed as one of the greatest heroes in baseball history. Unfortunately for Hal Smith, the Pirates couldn't hold the lead in the 9th inning. The Yankees tied the score, and a fellow by the name of Bill Mazeroski led off the bottom of the 9th inning. And of course, the rest is history, because Mazeroski has now hit the most famous home run in baseball history. So Hal Smith hit the most famous home run in baseball history for one inning. So here's an autograph baseball. Just some other things that I'll talk about as I go along. I'm sure you're familiar with this book, Mike Stoll's The Pitch That Killed. If you want to take a gander at Carl Mays and that freakish delivery, isn't it interesting that he's on the cover of this book rather than Ray Chapman? But there are 2 books written about Ray Chapman, right? This is the other one by Robert Cooper called The Universal Baseball Association. It was his second novel, after his first novel was about the experiences in the home runs here. But Ray Chapman figures as much into Cooper's second novel as it figures into this book. And I'll talk a little bit about that. Cooper also wrote a short story that we might want to talk a little bit about called McDuff on the Mound. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the short story or not. No? Well, he wrote a short story about the pitcher who pitches to the mighty Casey. McDuff. So it's a story about McDuff who is facing the mighty Casey, and he can't understand why all these crazy things are happening leading up to facing Casey. Well, he doesn't want to bat. He doesn't want to pitch against the mighty Casey, but things start happening in a rather cartoonish fashion, and he realizes it's his fate to pitch the mighty Casey. So So Robert Cooper also wrote a short story we might want to talk a little bit about. And then one other thing, when I was at university, I edited a series for a time called Writing Baseball. And one of the things that we did, which I'm very proud of, there is a series of team histories that were published in the 1940s and into the 1950s. They were published by Putnam, and they're generally regarded as the Cadillac of team history. So wonderful stories in them. I brought this in for you. This is the St. Louis team history in that series. Again, this is a reprint done by SIU Press. I marked in there a couple mentions of Andy High in this book. If you get mentioned in one of these books, you were in the major leagues, no doubt about it. And so there's a couple of highlights of Andy High's career that are mentioned in this book. This is the Cleveland Indians book in that series. And the thing that's remarkable about this book is that the description that Franklin Lewis gives of the moment after Ray Chapman was hit in the head differs from the standard description of that incident. In the standard description of the incident, the ball hits Ray Chapman in the side of the head, and it rolls out towards Carl May, who picks up the ball to throw to first base because he thinks it hits Chapman's bat. There's a different version in this book by a fellow who wrote for Cleveland papers for a number of years. So I think that's about it. I don't know if I really need to pass any of these books out. I'll just leave them up here for you. So that is a way of a lead-in. I went to two baseball sources. There's one called Baseball Reference. There's another one called Baseball Almanac, and they're terrific. They have great stuff on there. And I just Googled in baseball players born in Illinois, and came up with over 1,000 names. When I went through the list, I plucked out all the players that I saw were from towns in this area, and that's the list that you have. So that's the best I can do. 1,000 names. I may have missed one or two or more along the way, and I may have taken some of the information, some other garbled after time. I mentioned to you that when I wrote down Stan House, I went to Waterbury, and Waterbury became Stan instead of Steve. So that's one of the errors in there. So the list is as accurate as I can get it. There's as many names on there as I could find in that list, and I came up with 21 players from this area. Now notice that Bobby Veach is not on the list. And notice that Ray Chapman isn't on the list, and for the obvious reason, they were born in Kentucky, not in Illinois. Ray Fosse is on the list. He was born in Illinois. If you don't mind, let's just have a little fun with this list, and then we'll get to the stories of Veach and Chapman and Fosse. Great stories. Really, the three of them were the sort of players you want to play baseball, that you want your son or daughter to idolize. Popular players, wonderfully skilled at the game, potentially Hall of Famers. And in each one of the stories, it's like anything, any great story. It's a sort of Star Wars thing. You have to have the dark side, and there was a dark side in each one of their careers. There were villains. Bobby Veach's villain was one of the greatest in baseball history, Ty Cobb. Ray Chapman's villain was one of the most vilified figures in the history of baseball in Carl Mays. And the fellow who spent a few years in the Marion Penitentiary turned out to be the villain in Ray Fosse's career. So these are great stories, and we can have some fun with them. But let's take a look at this list. Just a few things that might have caught your eye as you went along. If I were to pick out my favorite player from this list, and again, I'm from Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh teams have a way of losing, and losing for a long time. We just came off 20 straight losing seasons in baseball. So I'm used to losing. It's why when I talk to Cardinal fans and I hear they're the greatest fans in the world, I say, come on, you're the Yankees in the National League, for God's sake. Try 20 straight losing seasons and then tell me you're the greatest baseball fans in the world. So I feel much more affinity with the Chicago Cubs fans than I do with the St. Louis Cardinal fans. I grew up in the 1950s. And when I got up in the morning and went to the paper, I never looked at the top of the National League standings. I could care less what the Dodgers and the Giants were doing in the National League. I went right to the bottom, because that's where the real race was going on. It was between the Cubs and the Pirates every year in the 1950s. We had god-awful teams. We had an infield that was so short that one commentator called them the Singer Midgets. Do you know who the Singer Midgets were? It was a theatrical group that provided the Munchkins for the Wizard of Oz. Andy High was short. He was 5'6". His nickname was Knee High. You can't beat that for a nickname. But he did look like a giant on that Pirate team in the 1950s. Our shortstop was 5'4.5", and he was Clem Short. So Andy High would have loomed over Clem Short. Are there any Cup fans out there? What's the three willing to admit it? What's the most famous baseball double play combination? Because of a poem written by a Chicago sports writer.
Tinkers to Everest to Chance.
Tinkers to Everest to Chance, right? They're all in the Hall of Fame. They're all elected in the same year. None of them should be in the Hall of Fame. They don't have the credentials. The poem that got them in. In the 1950s, the shortstop for the Chicago Cubs was called Roy Smalley. His name is Roy Smalley. The second baseman was a fellow by the name of Eddie Mixis, and the first baseman was Dee Fondy. The parody of that was Smalley to Mixis to the first base stands. And I couldn't understand why that kept happening. And then I read somewhere several years ago that Roy Smalley had a deformed finger. And so when Mixis would get the ball, he'd shovel it to Smalley, and Smalley would throw it to first base. But he had this deformed finger in his hand, and that sent the ball sailing over Dee Fondy's head, whoever was playing first base, into the first base stands, which explains a lot about that Mixis to Smalley to the first base stands. It doesn't explain why the Chicago management put him at shortstop for all those years. My baseball hero, Ralph Kiner, was traded to the Chicago Cubs. So Hank Sauer, who was one of the slowest runners in the history of baseball, was in left field. Ralph Kiner, one of the slowest runners in the history of baseball, was in right field. And poor Frankie Baumholz was in center field. They had a day for him, and Harley Davidson presented him with a motorcycle to help him cover the ground between Sauer and Kiner. Rumor was it that Frankie Baumholz had a sunburned tongue because he kept hanging out during the course of the season. Well, that's enough. My most popular player on this list is a fellow by the name of John Healy. He's at the bottom of the list. His nickname was Egyptian Healy. As a matter of fact, if you look up his name, if you Google his name, look up Egyptian Healy, because that's what you'll get. And this nickname is obvious because he was born in Cairo. The thing that I love about him, and it led to this long digression about losing teams, was that he's one of the losingest pitchers in the history of baseball. Bill James, the baseball historian, called him one of the unluckiest pitchers in baseball because he kept losing and losing and losing, and no matter where he went in his career, he ended up on a losing team. He actually pitched for the St. Louis Maroons in 1885. In his rookie year, I think he had 1 win and 7 losses. He year after year after year would lose over 20 games. There was one year where he lost 29 games. I think I put down, he had 23 games he lost for the Maroons. He was 12-29 with the Indianapolis Hoosiers after he left the St. Louis Maroons. But you have to love a guy like Egyptian Healy. If you're going out there game after game after game, year after year after year, and knowing that the odds are he was going to lose the game, he has the lowest winning percentage of any pitcher in the history of baseball, whose career extended over several years. I love players who the expression is, we're in the major leagues for a cup of coffee. Yeah, you'll find one of them on here. Let's see, where am I looking? Here he is, Delos Brown from Anna. Batted one time for the 1914 White Sox and struck out. But isn't that great? How many of us would have liked to have batted one time in the major leagues? It would have been nice to get a base hit, it would have been nice to get a home run, but even if you strike out, you're in the baseball encyclopedia. Your name is in there. Bob Bragg, the St. Louis writer, said that he used to really resent Eddie Geidel. You know who Eddie Geidel is? My phone. You know who Eddie Geidel is? He was the little person that Bill Beck used as a publicity stunt for the St. Louis Browns. And Eddie was, 3 feet, 3/4, something like that. He dressed up, he just got in a St. Louis Browns uniform. He wore the number 1/8 on his back. And it was a publicity stunt. He popped out of a cake with some sort of celebration or anniversary. But Beck had signed him to a major league contract. And so when the Browns came up for the first time, Eddie Geidel came walking up to home plate to bat. And Beck had very specific instructions for him. He said, "You are not to swing at a pitch." He said, "Just remember that I'm a Marine veteran and I was a sharpshooter in World War II. And I'll be in the stands with a rifle. You dare swing at a pitch, and I'll end your career on the spot." He didn't swing at a pitch, and of course he walked. And that was his only appearance in a major league game. But this is Bob Bragg. Oh, he said Eddie Geidel is in the baseball encyclopedia. He's a former major league player. He used to resent that about him. So here we have that stereotype in Dallas Brown from Hannah, who batted one time in the major leagues, and he struck out. If there's some rather the one player I wanted to ask you about is Lou Scofield. Scofield, there you go. Lou Scofield. To me, he's a mystery man. Okay. He was born in Herrin. He died in Herrin.
It'll probably be Herrin Hospital. He's Johnson City person.
What?
Johnson City person.
Johnson City?
Yeah.
Okay. Was he born in Herrin?
Probably because the hospital would be here.
Okay, so that's right. I'm just going based on the basis of the baseball almanac and. No, that's his debut. Anyway, the mystery to me is, yeah.
I always heard he dropped a fly ball and it sort of bothered him. It affected his career, he wasn't up.
Well, the thing that's baffling is that he came up with the Cardinals in 1936, right?
Yeah.
And he was on a team with the Dean brothers, and Dizzy and Daffy Dean. Johnny Mize was on that team. Leo DeRocher was on that team. And
Lou Scofield was my wife's great uncle.
oh, he was. What happened? He goes 3 for 7 in the major leagues, and that's it.
It wasn't an Indian Weezer.
Weezers was
Anyway, one time I was asked, you hit very well in the minors, why didn't you make it to majors? He said, I was a corner outfielder, I couldn't play center. He said, I came up behind Ducky Medwick, Enos Slaughter, and fouled. They finally got rid of Medwick because the kid named Musial came up.
That's the Ricky Chang game.
He later coached in the Cardinal system too. I was
Oh, he
talking
did?
to Bing Devine before Bing Devine passed away. He's talking about how great a manager he was in the minor leagues. So.
Yeah, he's the mystery man for me. He played one game. I think I actually wrote the date down somewhere here. April 16th. He played against the Chicago Cubs, the fall teams. Went 2 for 4.
One more interesting thing about him, he was the manager of Dean Devine's first team. When the Devine was the general manager in the minors.
So well-liked, baseball man. He goes 2 for 4 against the Cubs. 3 or 4 days later, he goes 1 for 3 against the Reds, and he's out of baseball. And he never appears again in a major league game. It's public. Ricky did have what was called a chain gang, and he had all these players that were blocked from going to the major leagues. But what Ricky did with them, and why I don't know why he would do it in this case, is he made money out of his chain gang. He would take the players that he wanted, and he would sell off the other players to other teams. So why he was blocked, I don't know. Why he never had a chance to play, because he had the credentials. So he's the mystery man for me on the system. Thank you very much for the information. There's some other folks on here. There's Hal Smith, you know, my particular hero on here. Gary Geiger is an interesting case. One of the more familiar major leaguers, born, I guess, next door to Murfreesboro. There's a painting in the Baseball Hall of Fame. There's actually a gallery. And there's a painting of Roger Maris hitting his 61st home run. And if you look very closely at the painting, you'll see Gary Geiger, because he's that little figure in right field. Because Roger Maris hit his 61st home run against the team that Geiger played for at that time. So Gary Geiger is in the Hall of Fame. He's in painting. And he's even smaller than the Pittsburgh Pirates shortstop in 1952.
One more piece about Geiger trivia. He
Sure.
got the first major league hit ever gotten in Bush Stadium too.
Which stadium too? I'm sorry, I didn't catch the...
He got the first hit in that ballpark.
Geiger?
In an actual game.
Sure. Thank you. Again,
1966.
just anything you have to contribute, that's fine. Let's see, any others on here that, the Hyde brothers, I assume Andy Hyde is well known in this area. Played on some of the great Cardinal teams. Played in the 1934 World Series. Actually played in 4 games during that series. You have, I think, 2 players for the Cleveland Indians who actually played with Joe Sewell, who replaced Ray Chapman after Chapman was fatally beamed. All you do is just connect the dots. You have a player who played for the Brooklyn Bridegrooms on this list. I don't know if you noticed that. Why were they called the Brooklyn Bridegrooms? You know the team he played for. You know the Brooklyn Dodgers. But they were called the Bridegrooms when he played for them. There he is, Frank Hansford from New Point. He played for the Brooklyn Bridegrooms. Why the Brooklyn Bridegrooms?
You have Stan Waterbury, is that Steve Waterbury?
That's Steve. Yeah,
That's Steve,
yeah,
okay.
yeah. Stan HAHS got sort of looped over to Waterbury.
I got to see him pitched in one of his games, the very end of the season, last game of the season, he came in and pitched 2 innings. Just by accident, I didn't know he was gonna be, I was there, that is an afternoon game, and he did real well in the 2 innings he pitched, but they were running through 2 or 3 other players trying to see if they could play.
There are
for
quite a
next
few
year.
Cardinals and Browns on this list, which should be obvious because of the scouting done by the Cardinals and Browns in this area. The reason they were called the Brooklyn Bridegrooms is because so many of the players married over the offseason. It gives you an idea. People talk about the sacredness of team names, and so the Brooklyn team was called the Brooklyn Robins because their manager was Wilbur Robinson, and so they had all these players who got married in the offseason, so they started calling them the Brooklyn Bridegrooms. The Brooklyn Dodgers, they shortened that name. It was originally the Trolley Dodgers, sure, because Evans Field was in a dangerous place, and so you had to dodge trolleys on your way to Evans Field, so they called them the Brooklyn Trolley Dodgers, and eventually they became shortened to that. The St. Louis Browns was the original name. The St. Louis Maroons was one of the names of the St. Louis Cardinals. The St. Louis Brown Stockings was one of the names of the St. Louis Cardinals. So they had several names before they eventually became the St. Louis Cardinals. When the St. Louis Browns came into the American League, the St. Louis Browns from the National League had dropped that name, and so the St. Louis Browns took that name. So there's really nothing all that sacred about the names. The Pittsburgh Pirates, swashbuckling Buccaneers, they got that name because they stole a player from another team. And so the team they stole a player from Philadelphia, and Philadelphia papers said, "Why those Pirates?" And it just stuck from that point on. So you have to be very careful with these names. I don't know if there's anyone else worth mentioning at this point on the list, but I love the Kansas City Cowboys as one of the teams on the list. You just can't beat some of this stuff that's on here. Stan HAHS, by the way, pitched against my Willie Stargell in the 1979 World Series with Baltimore. Very effective relief pitcher. All sorts of little nuggets on here. I love Babe Gordon because he played for the St. Louis Terriers.
There was another player from Johnson City that played on our team too, Henry Cooper. Henry Cooper,
Henry Cooper?
K-U-P-P-E-R, he played on that team also.
Oh, he did? What, the St. Louis Terriers?
St. Louis Terriers.
St. Louis Terriers. Tell them who the Terriers are? Or were?
Well, the league that, the federal league, was a group of teams. Indianapolis had a team, and Chicago had a team. There were several teams that kind of disbanded, but what they more or less did, took players from the Major League Baseball and
Baseball war.
Baseball war. World War II.
There was a baseball war in 1914, coincided with World War I. And St. Louis had actually 3 teams at that point because there were 3 major leagues that lasted for about 2 years. They had a team called the St. Louis Terriers, and Babe Gordon pitched for the St. Louis Terriers. Chicago had 3 teams. They also had a team in the Federal League. They were called the Chicago Whalers. And the fellow who owned the team built a ballpark for them. And then after the Federal League folded, he bought the Chicago National League team and had them play in his ballpark, which eventually became known as Wrigley Field. Lots of connections. So, anyways, that's the list, and those are the names, and every player has a story, one way or another. It's all sorts of intriguing stuff. Bobby Veach, Ray Chapman, Ray Fosse. Bobby Veach, at least the information I have, was born in Kentucky. Didn't really come here until he was about 17 years old. It's a coal mining family. His brothers worked in the coal mine. He worked in the coal mine for a period of time, but not very long, because he signed a professional baseball contract. He played for a time where a good many players from this area played, the 3I League, Illinois, Iowa, Indiana. It was a stepping stone for a great many ball players in this area. He had the good fortune or misfortune of becoming a Detroit Tiger. At the time, Detroit had 2 future Hall of Famers already in the outfield. In other words, he became the 3rd outfielder for a team that had Ty Cobb and Sam Crawford in the outfield. If you look at Bobby Veach's credentials, he should be in the Hall of Fame. There's simply no doubt about it. He batted well over 300 for his entire career. He led the major leagues in RBIs for several years. He batted 5th. Cobb batted 3rd. Crawford batted 4th. He batted 5th in that lineup. He led the league in doubles. He led the league in triples. I mean, he was just an offensive force at that time. He had one of the strongest throwing arms in baseball history, and yet he's not in the Hall of Fame.
How do you do with RBIs? How do you do with RBIs with those guys batting in front of you?
They're on base. You go the driving runs, it helped to have Ty Cobb in front of you. When Sam Crawford left the Detroit Tigers, the Tigers picked up another outfielder by the name of Barry Hellman, who is also in the Baseball Hall of Fame. So Bobby Veach's problem was that he was an outstanding baseball player, Hall of Fame credentials, but he was overshadowed by Ty Cobb, who was a menacing figure in baseball, and Sam Crawford, who was one of the most colorful players in baseball. Ty Cobb hated Bobby Veach. He hated Veach. Of course, Cobb hated just about everybody, right? But he really hated Bobby Veach because he was a nice guy. He was just a pleasant fellow. He enjoyed playing baseball, but he also enjoyed the company around him. Unfortunately, he enjoyed the company not only of his Tiger teammates, he enjoyed the company of other players and umpires. He just liked to talk. He would go up to the plate and ask the catcher how he's doing, say hello to the umpire, and then he would step in. Cobb would be furious that he would do that. So he finally worked out a deal with Harry Hellman. He says, now, Cobb was going to bat 3rd, and Veach was going to bat 4th, and Hellman was going to bat 5th. So Hellman, when Veach came up, Hellman would be in the on-deck circle. He said, when Beach starts talking to play, to the catcher, when he starts talking about Pirates, I want you to get on him. I want you to tell him that's the worst thing in the world to do. What's wrong with you? You're talking to the enemy, and shout profanities at him and obscenities at him, and get him mad. Get him all worked up. And he said, now don't worry, when the season's over, I'll tell Beach that I told you to do that. But for the entire season, I want you to get all over him. Every time he comes up, I want you to just get on him and get on him and get on, and just don't let up. And Harry went along with it. At the end of the season, Cobb left. And Alvin went to Beach and told him, he says, well, Cobb told me to do this, and Cobb never said a word to Bobby Beach. And so Bobby Beach would not talk to Harry Hellman. He thought Harry Hellman was just an awful, terrible human being, but Cobb had put him up to that. So in the case of Bobby Beach, you've got a Hall of Famer here. All you look at the credentials of some, you look at Enos Slaughter's stats, for example. There's no comparison. He was just such a dynamic figure, such a powerful figure. And even though he didn't hit that many home runs, remember that they were playing in these huge ballparks in those days, and they were playing with what was called dead balls. So look at the doubles. Look at the triples. That's where you'll see it. And most of the leaders in home runs in 1909, when the Pirates played the Detroit Tigers in the 1909 World Series against Ty Cobb. But I'm trying to think of that. Bobby Leach is the last name, but I'm not sure Bobby is the first name. The Pirates had a third baseman by the name of Leach, who led the National League with 6 home runs in 1909. He was a little guy. Every home run was inside the park. In other words, the National League leader in home runs in 1909 had 6 home runs, didn't hit a single one of them out of the ballpark. If you look at any of the stats, look in the encyclopedia, and there he'll be. Tommy Leach, 6 home runs, 1909, led the league in home runs. So that's your Bobby Beach, a remarkable player, a great outfielder, one of the best hitters in baseball history, but completely overshadowed by Ty Cobb and Sam Crawford, and later on by Ty Cobb and Harry Hellman. Ray Chapman, what can I tell you that you don't already know about Ray Chapman from the guests that you've had here? You know, for example, that maybe an obvious thing that he was killed by Carl Mays, and I'm asked Ray Chapman to step forward. Where's my baseball? I need a hard one.
Hard one.
I wanted to do this with Gordon for a long time. No, I'm not going to use that soft one. When I was growing up on the south side, my dad was a pitcher, and he was Messiah. It was called, they called it slinging at that time. He was an old-time pitcher, and he just sort of threw the ball that way when we caught. And so I picked up that way of throwing, not that extreme. In the old days, I mean, it really got extreme. They were down here with the ball. It was called, Carl Mays was called the submarine pitcher. They just come from here. But most of the time when someone throws a baseball, right, they're going to come over the top with the ball. And if you come over the top, what's a good angle? If you throw a ball over, I'm not going to throw that, I promise. If you throw a ball over the top, the spin is going to go this way. That's why if you alter your fingering of the seams, if you snap your wrist, you can do things with that ball, because as it comes out of that spin, you can throw a curve, which will go this way. You can throw an overhand curve, which we used to call a jug handle curve in our days. We used to call it a drop in our days, because the curve would start way up here, and it would curve, and it would appear to drop as it went past the batter. You've got the slider today, you've got the cutter today. They all move the same way, right? They all move in this direction with this spin, right? If you take someone throwing in the way my father threw, in the way that he taught me to throw, the ball is going to take a different rotation. when I was pitching in the Little League, I was playing catch with one of our coaches, and he started calling the other coaches over, and he said, "You better watch this kid." He says, "Throw something." And I threw something, and it came like this. It didn't spin this way. The ball I threw from here spun this way. And so instead of throwing a ball that moved in this way, I threw a ball that was moving into the batter. A screwball, exactly. Carl Hubbell's screwball. Except we didn't call it a screwball in our day. We called it an in-shoot. I was throwing an in-shoot. I didn't even know it. And they came over and they said, "Look, he's throwing a screwball." You know, so I would warm up, and my coach would say, "Quit throwing your breaking ball." And as you're warming up, the ball. It's just the way. It was just a natural thing because of the release, the way that I was releasing the ball. And just it's not. If you see Gordon, it was a spinning image of Ray Chapman. You can see how dangerous the pitch is that's coming at Ray Chapman. Because again, if Carl Mays threw like that, the pitch would usually take that kind of spin as it approached Chapman. If the pitch is coming this way, in other words, it's rotating to come toward Ray Chapman. Right? That's why it's such a dangerous pitch. And that's the way Carl Mays threw it. Carl Mays didn't care whether he hit batters or not. But that doesn't make him a villain, because Bob Gibson didn't care if he hit batters or not. He hit somebody in an all-timers game. Because he still was a little bit mad. When Bill White came over to the Cardinals, he hit Bill White. Yeah. So Don Drysdale, Bob Gibson, why was Sal Magley called the barber? Do you think he was a barber in the off-season? No, because he threw something called chin music. Right? So here you have Chapman batting against the Yankees. Babe Ruth, by the way, is in right field. And Carl Mays, one of the best pitchers in the major leagues. He and Ruth were the stars of that 1918 Red Sox championship, champion season. He was one of the best pitchers in the major leagues. But again, he had that way of throwing. He had that submarine way of throwing. And this is a rainy day, a dark day. Reports even say that there was some fog in the area. And there's Ray Chapman. Ray Chapman's already done it twice in the game. And Gordon will illustrate Ray Chapman's batting position, right? If this is home plate, okay, put your head over home plate. That's the way Ray Chapman batted, right? He crowded the plate because he loved to bunt. He'd crowd the plate and then he'd back up and bunt, and off he'd go. So here's Carl Mays pitching. He's already faced Chapman twice. Chapman has bunted the ball twice. And so he throws to get him to do what? Get out of the way. You want to bunt again? See if you can bunt this one. And it comes sailing with this rotation. And so Chapman, who's probably having trouble picking up the ball, sees the ball about here, but it's rotating in an unorthodox fashion. It's rotating toward him, and that's it, Gordon. Get your catching gear on. The sad thing, of course, about what happened to Ray Chapman was like Bobby Beach. He was a Hall of Fame player. And there's simply no doubt about it. He was such an accomplished ball player. One of the greatest runners in baseball history, greatest stealing bases, great defensive shortstop. When you look at the Hall of Fame and you look at Pee Wee Reese, and you look at Phil Rizzuto, he has the same credentials. As a matter of fact, his offensive credentials are even better than Phil Rizzuto. And the only question about whether or not he was going to make it, of course it was the Hall of Fame then, the only question would have been, would he have played long enough? And I'm not talking about the beating. Again, as you probably know, he had actually decided to retire from baseball. And he was lured back for one season by Tris Speaker, who's in that photo that's being passed around. Cleveland had never won an American League pennant. And he thought that in 1920 they could win the pennant for Trispeaker, and so he went back as a favorite speaker to win that pennant in that World Series for Trispeaker. The interesting thing is that at that time they were in a pennant race with the New York Yankees, and it's hard to believe that the Yankees in 1920 had never won a pennant or played in a World Series. It was the first year that they had Babe Ruth. And he had 54 home runs that year. He revolutionized baseball. 1920 was a remarkable year. You had Harry Frazee selling Babe Ruth to the Yankees so that he could finance a musical. He had baseball trying to help the game offensively by getting rid of trick pitches. No more spitballs, no more emery balls, no more shine balls, no more tobacco balls, no more licorice balls, out. All that was out. And isn't it ironic that Chapman is hit with May's pitch in the year in which they made all those pitches illegal? They also said that teams were using dirty baseballs. They were keeping it in the game too long. Players were having trouble, and after a time, not only did the baseballs get dirty, but they started to lose their shape in time. So they wanted the umpires to start throwing out baseballs and getting clean baseballs, new baseballs into the game. So there's so many great ironies to that 1920 season. That pennant race between the Indians and the Yankees, and of course the White Sox were in the mix that year. They were coming off playing in the 1919 World Series. There were rumors circulating at that time that the series had been fixed in the 1919 season. As a matter of fact, the Cleveland Indians may not have won the 1920 pennant, except that several of the White Sox players were suspended near the end of the 1920 season because of the growing scandal involving the 1919 World Series. And of course, one further irony is that the player who replaced Chapman, Joe Sewell, went on to become a member of the Hall of Fame. So again, this is another player who clearly belonged. If it had lasted, who knows what would have happened if he had played in the World Series? How could he have resisted coming back after that and playing for another few years? A beautiful wife and a millionaire father-in-law is, of course, quite a temptation to retire from baseball, but it's just tragic in so many ways what happened to Ray Chapman. And again, if you look at the pattern, and Gordon was on the record with 3 ball players, the pattern's remarkable because Bobby Beach he was such a sweetheart as a ball player. I mean, he was so popular, he was so well liked and admired, except for Ty Cobb. And the same with Ray Chapman. Ray Chapman was beloved. I mean, Cleveland fans adored Ray Chapman. He was admired and respected by not only just his teammates, but also those who played against him. One thing, I'm sorry for laughing at this, but one of the ironies was that when the meeting occurred and Chapman died, the ball player who was the most aggressive in saying Carl Mays needs to be kicked out of baseball. He's mean, he's violent, and he should be out of the game. That player was Tom.
Yeah, right.
He wanted Mays out of the game. Speaking of the Hall of Fame, Carl Mays should be in the Hall of Fame. He's one of the great pitchers in Major League history. Won over 200 games. How many pitchers out there who won 200 games are not in the Hall of Fame? Carl Mays. He should be in the Hall of Fame. Of course, he'll never be in the Hall of Fame because he's blackballed. You'll never see an Old Timers Committee select him for the Hall of Fame. So you have Ray Chapman, who's denied the Hall of Fame by that pitch that Carl Mays threw, and Carl Mays denied the Hall of Fame because he threw that pitch to Ray Chapman. And as for Ray Fosse, and again, I'm sure you know all sorts of things about Ray Fosse. The most important moment in Fosse's career, again, is a tragic moment for him. Again, a player immensely popular, loved by his teammates, loved by other players, and just a terrific guy, terrific ball player. Makes the 1970 All-Star game in his first full season in the major league. Seems to have it all. Great defensive catcher, great arm. He's had everything in the world going for him. He plays in the 1970 All-Star game in Cincinnati. And he is the catcher in the 10th inning when Pete Rose gets on base in a tie game. So Rose is on second base, Hickman is batting, it's the bottom of the 10th inning, the game is tied, Hickman singles to center field, and here comes Pete Rose. We're out there heading home. You know what happens, that Rose, as the ball, you watch the ball.
Oh, yeah.
You're watching the ball from there, right? As the throw approaches Ray Fosse, Pete Rose barrels him over, going into home plate. It became, and still is, one of the most controversial plays in baseball history. And what's so controversial about it? Did he do it on purpose? Did he try to hurt Pete Rose? And notice the patterns here among these ball players. The controversy was Carl Mays. Did Carl Mays try to hit Ray Chapman in the head with that pitch? Did Pete Rose try to run Fosse over? If I can give you an illustration of what I've seen in the videos, you tell me. There's Ray Fosse, right? Now, the throw is coming in, home plate is here. Right? Now, when Rose comes in, let's say home plate was here, and the throw is coming directly in. If you were Pete Rose, what would you go after? Somebody could play football. What would you do? No, you can't get to that big. So Rose sees you reaching for the ball. He's going to take you out on his plate. The game is in Cincinnati. It's his hometown. He's Pete Rose, Charlie Hustle. He wants to put on a show. He doesn't want to hurt anybody because he doesn't care. He could care less about anybody but Pete Rose putting on a show for Cincinnati's fans. And here comes this ball in from center field, and there's Ray Fosse. Now, if that throw was right on line, which it wasn't, if that throw was right on line, reach for it. Okay. And you're Pete Rose, what are you going to do? You're going to do what a football player would do, right? You're going to go right into him like that and lift him off his feet and knock him. That didn't happen. The reason it didn't happen is that the throw is out here. And Fosse is reaching for the throw that's coming in. Rose has a lane. Today, Rose would be thrown out of the game for what he did and probably suspended for what he did. There's a lane for him. It's an all-star game. There's a lane for him to score, but it's Cincinnati, it's the all-star game, and he's Pete Rose, and he has to put on a show. So what he does is he comes in and reaches for the ball. He takes out his shoulder like that and sends him bowling. And that's what killed Fosse's career, right there, that shoulder. So again, if Ross, again, this is just my opinion after watching the videos and just playing a lot of ball and being short and aggressive and mean-spirited. I've often done what Pete Rose did. Usually I'm so small, but Pete Rose is built like a linebacker. I'm so small, I just bounce off the catcher. But anyways, you can see the difference. If the ball was, if Fosse was reaching here, then Rose would have had him right here, right into the chest protector, by the way, and he would have lifted him off his feet. But because he was reaching and that shoulder was vulnerable, and again, Pete Rose had his lane. He had the throw beat. But for the show, he went right into that shoulder and sent him flying. And that's the injury that really changed Fosse from an all-star catcher into a player with great talent who could never actualize that talent because of that injury that he suffered against Pete Rose.
Sort of ironic, Pete ended up in the Marion prison
Yes, he did.
for 3 years,
Yes, he
4
did.
years.
Yeah.
Question, do you think Pete Rose belongs in the Hall of Fame?
Oh, my, what kind of worms.
Let's see, show of hands.
What kind of worms.
While you think about that, for people who don't know, there's a picture of this contact in the County Historical Society. And written in the lower right-hand corner of this picture is written Ray. Sorry about that.
Oh, sure.
Signed Pete Rose.
Yeah, oh, yeah, well, yeah, that'll get him a,
For those who haven't seen it, it's interesting to see.
that'll get him $1 cup of coffee.
Is Ray Fossey still broadcasting for the A's?
I think he is.
Yeah.
He is.
You never answered my question.
Oh, but, yeah. If I can give you a preview of coming attractions. I do this reading baseball series, and 2 weeks from today, they'll air, if everything goes according to schedule, they'll air a piece that's called, trying to think what the title is. It's a piece about Pete Rose and a Pirate pitcher by the name of Fritz Austin. Have any of you seen the movie 42? In the movie 42, there's a moment, the most dramatic moment in the movie, when Jackie Robinson faces the Pittsburgh Pirates for the first time. The pitcher on the mound is Fritz Austin, pitch for the Pirates. He's portrayed as a right-hander, young, blazing fastball. Robinson comes up, and the catcher does this, which means throw it at him. Austin Mueller throws the ball, and it hits, this is a perfect topic considering what we're talking about, it hits Robinson in the side of the head. Down he goes, Dodgers come running out of the dugout, Pirates come running out of the dugout, there's a bit of dust up. Fritz Austin Mueller keeps yelling, he doesn't belong here, he doesn't belong here, he doesn't belong here. It's in the movie. The Dodgers need one more win to capture National League pennant. They go to Pittsburgh. Guess who's pitching? Fritz Austin Mueller. And Fritz Austin Mueller points at Robinson and says, you still don't belong here. And Robinson says, throw me something. Austin Mueller throws him his fastball. Robinson gets it out of the ballpark. The Dodgers, at least from what you see in the movie, have apparently won the pennant, because Robinson is circling the bases, and next thing you know, as he rounds third, he's running down the street to his wife, and they embrace, and of course it has that ending. So who's the villain? In 42, Pirate pitcher Fritz Austin Mueller. You've got to be kidding me. Ines Slaughter tries to spike him in St. Louis. It's in the movie, it's passed over rather briefly. The Cardinals conspired not to play against the Dodgers because Dixie Walker was on the Dodger team and Harry Walker, his brother, was with the Cardinals. Come on. You take this pitcher, who, by the way, was 39 years old at the time, threw left-handed, had had his elbow cap removed because Hank Greenberg hit him with a line drive in the elbow. He had this freakish windmill wind-up. He went way down and came way up because he had to unlock his arm in order to throw the ball. This is the pitcher who nearly killed Jackie Robinson. You've got to be kidding me. Cheryl Dusterhouse, Fritz Austin Mueller's daughter, saw 42 and wept. She couldn't believe what they had done to her father. She wrote to the baseball commissioner's office and pleaded with them to help her clear her father's name. She wrote to the producers of 42 and asked them for an apology. She hasn't heard a word from anybody. Pete Rose is now 25 years into his banishment from baseball. And with a new commissioner coming into baseball, I'm getting to it now. The new commissioner coming into baseball, they're saying enough is enough. 25 years is long enough. He gambled on baseball, gambled on his own team, pleaded guilty to income tax evasion from the money he made signing his autographs, and spent months in Marion in the penitentiary. I thought I wrote a pretty Itchy Jones story for you for that time about Pete Rose and Marion in the penitentiary. But so they said it's time. Bud Selig is stepping down, and his assistant is stepping in. What a great moment for baseball if they finally forgive Pete Rose. And it's been very hard for baseball to forgive Pete Rose because Pete Rose is Pete Rose. He doesn't make it easy for you to forgive him because he's such a boorish character. He's not very bright, and he keeps saying the wrong thing. Every time his teammates try to muster support to get his banishment removed, he's not banished, he is ineligible. That's the word that they use. Every time someone like Mike Schmitz tries to organize something to get him back in the game, Pete Rose will say something absolutely stupid that derails the whole process.
Yeah, he had the book signing at the Hall of Fame right before the Hall of
Every
Fame.
year, every
They said they
year.
were voting for him.
And you know what day he comes to the Hall of Fame? He is ineligible for the Hall of Fame as well. When A. Bartlett Giamatti made him ineligible, and by the way, 3 months later, A. Bartlett Giamatti died of a massive heart attack. A lot of people think that Pete Rose was the reason. That's why it's so hard to forgive him and put him in the Hall of Fame. Among the other things that he does, he's so boorish and so embarrassing. He's an embarrassment to baseball. He goes to the Hall of Fame. He's ineligible for the Hall of Fame. After Bartlett Giamatti made him ineligible for a baseball job, then his replacement quickly moved out. Who replaced? Oh, shoot. Oh, no. It'll come to me as we're talking. Anyways, he formed a committee at the Hall of Fame and said, my God, he's the Major League hit leader. He's ineligible for a baseball job, but they can still elect him to the Hall of Fame, and those crazy sport writers are going to do that. So they made him ineligible for the Hall of Fame as well. But he goes up to the Hall of Fame on induction day. So every year that they honor players inducted to the Hall of Fame, there's Pete Rose in front of one of the shops. And he's signing baseball, and he's signing Pete Rose autographs, and he's passing the things that he's on. What could be more embarrassing than to have a player banished from baseball signing autographs on induction day at the Hall of Fame? He just makes it so hard to forgive him. When he came out with a book, My Prison Without Bars, and he came out with some cockamamie theory about this gambling addiction that's been in his blood that he inherited from his father, and he blamed everybody except Pete Rose for gambling on baseball. He makes it so hard to forgive him. So I wrote this piece on Rose and Austin Mueller that's going to be aired 2 weeks from today, and it's basically saying that baseball's trying to get Pete Rose back in the eligibility list, get him back into baseball. They would like to get him back. They'd like to get him into the Hall of Fame. And I say, and yet they're not saying a word about poor Fritz Austin, whose reputation was ruined by 42. His character was completely maligned. His family is devastated and heartbroken by what and this movie was praised for what? Its integrity, for its honesty. The Jackie Robinson story. On the process, why they had to pick poor Fritz Austin? Well, I tell you why, because Fritz Austin did hit him with a pitch. We threw the ball inside, and Fritz Austin and Jackie Robinson did what Ray Chapman didn't do. He just stepped back, put his arm up, and hit him with the wrist. They knew that Austin Miller had hit Robinson with the wrist. But they never hit him in the head. By the way, Robinson was never hit in the head during his entire career in the major leagues. He was very good at ducking pitches because he had a lot of practice. Pitchers were continually throwing at him. In his first year in the major leagues, there was actually an article written in a New York paper, perhaps, saying that Robinson knew that every time he came out for the first time, whether it was Cincinnati or St. Louis, the first pitch would come right under his chin. It was automatic. He knew that was going to happen. That happened to him. Robinson said that he struggled in the early part of his first season in the major leagues. He said, "It's doing me a favor. That's the only way you can get on base." All good things, those things eventually worked out. So that article says that if you're going to put Pete Rose in, fine, but do something about Fritz Austin as well. My view, if I were Bud Selig, I wouldn't want to be Bud Selig. If I were Bud Selig, it's a golden opportunity. Why not just a blanket pardon? I mean, not just Rose, but why not the Black Sox? And why not shoot this Joe Jackson? Why not just, I mean, you're coming out of this whole steroid period in baseball. You've got so many players who we know cheated because they've been identified. including Mark McGuire and Sammy Sosa, who were so celebrated in 1998 for saving baseball at that time. And there's so many, there are hundreds of, over 100 players, I guess I would give Mark's estimate, who were on performance enhancing drugs over the past years who have never been identified. There's a list in the Commissioner's office of 100 names. There's only a handful of players who have been identified who are on that list. So, okay, just make it a blanket pardon, reinstate them all, and then see. Let the writers vote. Let the committees decide on these players. I'd say if you love baseball and you're willing to swallow hard, then Rose should be a Hall of Fame, an all-time hit leader. He was an immensely popular player during his day. Shoeless Joe Jackson, one of the greatest hitters in baseball history, still banned from baseball. And there are a bunch of other players that are sort of overlooked. It's more than the 8 Blackstockings who have been banned from the game. There's a bunch of other players. Ty Cobb and Speaker, by the way, were implicated in gambling at one point, but they sort of put it under coverage at that point. Do we have that photo, by the way? That photo that I was passing around? I'll end it on this. Okay. Babe Ruth, right smack in the center, bigger than life. The tall, skinny chap on his left.
Connie Mack.
Connie Mack, sure. The fellow staring off in the distance as if he has Alzheimer's and may well have had Alzheimer's by then. Pitched for the Cardinals for a couple seasons, winningest pitcher in the history of baseball.
Alexander?
No. He's there, but not this guy. Cy Young. The Cy Young Award every year is named in his honor, the winningest pitcher in the major league. No one will ever come close to his number of wins, simply because no pitcher can pitch as long as he pitched these days. Over on this side, Eddie Collins, second baseman for the Chicago White Sox, played in the 1919 World Series. College graduate. They hated him because he was a college graduate. Flying Dutchman. Played in the 1909 World Series against Ty Cobb. Ty Cobb got on first base and he yelled, "Hey, Dutchman." Oh, no, I take that back. He yelled down, "Hey, Kraut. I'm coming down on the next pitch." Took off, catcher threw the ball. Wagner got it in plenty of time. Here comes Cobb. Wagner stepped aside, let the spikes go through, and put the ball right into his face. And put about 3 or 4 stitches into his head. You know how to play baseball. Somebody already mentioned this fellow. Grover Cleveland Alexander. What did he give the Cardinals in 1926? World Series victory. Yeah, he was the one who came in. I talk about stories, whether they're true or not. He pitched the day before, tied the series at 3-3, went out to the bullpen. Hornsby said, I might have to use you. He didn't think he had a prayer in the world pitching. A lot of people think that he was drinking before the game. Sometimes he carried a bottle with him. He could have been drinking in the bullpen as well. And then comes the 8th inning, and Jesse Haynes, Cardinal pitcher who's in the Hall of Fame, who threw a knuckleball, which is misnamed because you throw a knuckleball with your fingertips, not with your knuckles. He developed blisters from throwing knuckleballs. So Hornsby came out. He said, I want Alexander. Some people say Alexander staggered him. And some say no. But it's a great story. See, baseball has such great stories. So you want Alexander to be drinking at this point. You want him to stagger him because of what he does in spite of that. He goes on and he faces the Yankees with the bases loaded and he strikes out, one of the best hitters in baseball tournament. After Lazari missed hitting a grand slam home run by about that much. The ball just curved out. He struck him out. And by the way, Alexander had to come back out in the 9th inning to finish off the game, and with 2 outs, he walked Babe Ruth. A little dangerous dude, considering the next guy was Lou Gehrig. But Ruth, and again, it's part of one of those inexplainable mysteries of history, Ruth decided to steal second base. It's this kind of overweight guy waddling down to second base. They throw him out. World Series is over. Cardinals are champs. Grover Cleveland Alexander, who, by the way, suffered shell shock during World War I. And that was the reason why he drank. at that time because his nerves were so bad. This fellow, Larry Chapman, your speaker. That was Chapman's player manager. There's Tris Speaker called the Great Eagle, and you see the natty appearance of him. This fellow played second base when Ray Chapman broke into the major leagues. Napoleon Lajoie played second base for Cleveland Indians. He played for, we can't get back to two names. He played for so long for Cleveland that they called Cleveland the Cleveland Naps. They weren't the Cleveland Indians, they were the Cleveland Naps. So when Napoleon quit playing for the Cleveland Indians, they decided they needed a different name. So they conducted a poll. And now we get into some of the issues that are going on today with the Atlanta Braves and the Washington Redskins, right? And the Cleveland Indians. They conducted a poll, and Cleveland fans decided to call the team the Cleveland Indians to honor a pitcher by the name of Sox Alexis, who had been an outstanding pitcher for the Indians earlier in their history. So the name Cleveland Indians, though politically incorrect these days, in those days was meant to honor a Native American who had pitched for the Cleveland Indians. I guess the Cleveland Sock Alexis wouldn't quite work. Okay. St. Louis player, but not a Cardinal.
George Sisler.
George Sisler, sure. One of the greatest hitters in baseball, rivaled Ty Cobb at that point. Batted .420 in 1 year for the St. Louis Browns. In the early history of St. Louis, the Browns were the more popular of the two teams. Far more popular than the Cardinals. The Cardinals really didn't have much going for them in their early history. The St. Louis Browns did. And in 1922, when this fellow batted .420, they missed the World Series by 1 game against the New York Yankees. So the Cardinals didn't win their first pennant until 1926. The Brownies did, however, win a pennant, right? 1944, during the war years, when all the great players were all the service during that time. We even had a one-arm outfielder at that point by the name of Sweet Gray. And this fellow, Walter Johnson, great Walter Johnson story. Ty Cobb knew that Walter Johnson, who had arguably the greatest fastball in baseball history, knew that Walter Johnson was afraid of killing the batter. And he would pitch him outside. So what did Cobb do? I should be going in that there. Cobb knew that Johnson was afraid of hitting a batter and killing him with his fastball. So what did Cobb do? He crowded the plate. He moved up. So that Johnson would have to give him, instead of the ball coming in on the outside corner, it was in effect visually coming in right down the center of the plate because Cobb was standing on the plate. And he knew that Johnson wouldn't throw at him. And he was coming up. He was a mean bugger, but you've got to give him credit for intelligence. I mean, he really knew how to play the game. So that pretty much covers the bases. That's your original induction class. But one other thing about this photo. Have you noticed something odd about it? I'll close on this. Something odd. These are the ones who are still alive. Who also was still alive at this time? Ty Cobb. Wait a minute. Where is Ty Cobb? Oh, he's there. He's in Cooperstown for the induction ceremony. They didn't want him in the photograph. You've seen Field of Dreams? Do you remember when the Shoeless Joe character talks to Ray Kinsella about the players? And he says they're all out there, except Ty Cobb. He said, and excuse my language, but his language, he said, we didn't want that mean son of a bitch. So even in the Field of Dreams, there's a player banned from baseball. It's Ty Cobb. Just very quickly, one last, I forgot this. I was going to end with this picture. Robert Cooper. I mean, again, familiar to all of you. You know about his fiction. This is a book written about Ray Chapman, obviously. This is a book influenced by Ray Chapman. I don't know if any of you have read this novel, but this was a novel that followed the, the Origin of the Bruce, his first novel about the coal mine Manheim disaster. This is his second novel. It's a baseball novel. The Universal Baseball Association Incorporated, J. Henry Watt. Well, I asked Gordon if this is the first edition of the book. And if any of you are familiar with SIU, it was owned by Howard Webb, who was chairman of the English department when I came here in 1969. This book was published in 1968. So Howard Webb bought the book. It was in his library, and it's now in my possession. I asked Gordon if the library has a first edition of Universal Baseball Association. If it doesn't, it's yours. You can have this book, and it has the additional value of Howard Webb's autograph inside the copy. So it goes from Robert Coover to Howard Webb to me to the Herrin Library. That's four. Very quickly, if you haven't read the book, you should read it, because it's about an accountant who lives this boring, drab life. And the only thing of value in his life is a baseball dice league. Now, I don't know if any of you grew up playing baseball games, but one of the popular devices, this is before the electronic stuff came into play, and you can now simulate games with computers and iPhones and this and that. We use spinners and dice to play those games. He invents, he loves figures, he loves stats, and he invents a baseball dice league. And he keeps all the records year after year after year. So he lives this absolutely boring, dreadful life, but he lives in this fantasy world. This dice league, which is more real to him than anything in his life. He follows these players exist as if they're actually real for him. And at one point, this rookie emerges, Damon Rutherford, a wonder kind, the greatest ball player ever created out of his dice league. And in his rookie season, he's just mowing batters down. Greatest pitcher, greatest player in his dice league. He starts to roll the dice, and there's only one combination, just an extraordinary combination that will lead to what? A beanball that kills. And so he rolls the dice, he rolls the dice, he rolls the dice, and it keeps moving in that direction. One more roll of dice, if it comes up a certain way, and Damon Rutherford is dead. Backs away from the table, and one roll of dice, and most of the book, the dice are just there. And he finally goes back, picks up the dice, and rolls them. Robert Coover is from Herrin. He knows Ray Chapman. What happens? He rolls the right combination, wrong combination for him. He's horrified, and Damon Rutherford is beaten and dies. Now, what does Henry Watt do about this? Well, he drinks heavily. He lives pretty much a gutter life for a while, and he decides there's a way he can deal with this. Every spring, for every year in his dice league, they bring out a young pitcher, and they have him backed. And they bring out a pitcher to throw a baseball that will kill him. So every season, they sacrifice a young player to initiate the season. Does it sound familiar? It's ritual. It's what Coover does, right? In his novels, he creates these myths. He creates these super realities, and that's what he's done in the Bad Equation. He creates these ancient. He creates in his dice league the equivalent of ancient rituals of the sacrificial victim. So there you have Ray Chapman, and notice what he does. He takes Ray Chapman, this terrible, terrible, tragic story, and he creates a mythology out of it in Universal Baseball Association. So there you go. As Dorothy would say, right in your own backyard. I think that you've heard enough from me about all this. I'd be very happy to answer any questions you have, very happy to listen to any comments that you have.
I'm curious about Bob Beach for a personal reason.
Okay.
When I was a little kid, and Sam Sutler may have the answer to this because we lived on the same street for a while. Bob Beach, a man named Bob Beach, was my postman when I was a kid. Is he related? Sam, do you know?
Which,
Jack asked, say it again.
say it again, I didn't.
Talking about Bob Beach.
Okay,
When I was a kid and we lived on 12th Street,
yeah.
Bob Beach was our postman. Is it the same person? Beach.
B-E-A-C-H.
Thank you. I thought there was something wrong about that.
B-E-A-C-H.
Yeah, 'cause
Yeah, Bob Beach was,
Yeah, it couldn't have been the
but
baseball.
not, no
Bob Beach.
relation.
That's what I wanted to know.
But they lived within 2 blocks of each other.
Is that right?
Yes, Bob Beach he was in the class of 1940 in high school. And I've got the pictures, I've got a photograph here of Bob and Bill Beach, who is Bob, the baseball player's
Okay.
nephew. And I've got the picture of Charles Chapman here, who is the nephew of Ray Chapman. And we all played together over at Walker's house and in that field, in the field out there.
Bobby Beach lived in Detroit after his
Okay.
baseball career was over.
Yeah,
And-
that's-
And he actually bought into a coal company.
So now I'm glad you straightened that out because I conflated the two, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the way that fell, but I think Bob Beach, the baseball player, married a woman that was in the 1916 high school class, and I've got that's the first year they put a year-end program out, and I think his wife was in that class. I can't remember her name. She came back here to Herrin and lived in Herrin several years after that. I can't think of her name. My father knew her very well. I think he was in that class.
His wife's name was Ethel Claire Schiller Beach. Ethel Claire, C-L-A-R-E, Schiller Beach. And,
What was the name then, her name, maiden name?
Schiller.
Schiller.
Her name is Ethel Schiller.
Scheller.
Schiller.
How do you spell it?
Again, they settled in the Detroit area.
Okay,
He had 3 children.
We've got, in the library over here, we've got the 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, we've got from 1916 on of those. But I'd met her before, my father knew her very well, and so she must have been in one of those classes right there.
Let me show you some cheat sheets.
Yeah.
There's an organization called the Society of American Baseball Research. And they're terrific except for one thing. They're too much like J. Henry Law. I love baseball stories. I'm terribly fond of baseball stats except the magical ones. And McGuire and Sosa and Company managed to ruin a lot of those. They're the ones who come up with they're called sabermetrics. When you watch TV and you hear announcers talking about strange figures, they're the folks who invent those. But they have this wonderful project. It's called the Bio Project. They haven't done it for all the major leaguers, but they've done it for quite a few. Here's Bobby Beach. If you want, I can leave these for the library as well. Here's the Bio Project for Bobby Beach. Here's the Bio Project for Ray Chapman. And here's the Bio Project for Ray Fossey. They're terrific. And a source material. So the magician has just shown you how it was graphic out of my head. But baseball is the national game.
Mr. Peterson, I have a question, because I missed part of it. Did you grow up, are you a baseball player? How did your interest, you're an English professor, and yet you're a baseball historian, so what is your story?
A lot of wrong turns. Look at me. This is not a Mark McGuire body, right? I'm a little guy. I grew up in Pittsburgh in a working class neighborhood. I've already mentioned that. And you either played ball or you ended up in juvenile court. I mean, that's just simply the way it was. And I was fortunate because I had a father who loved baseball, and he played baseball. and he started taking me out to powder games, and I simply fell in love with the game. And at that time, we just played on our own. I lived along the banks of the Monongahela River. All I had to do was walk 2 blocks. There was a city park there. Every day, I just took my glove, and we had, bats were usually, bats we'd find at Force Field that were broken, and we'd just nail them together, and we'd use those bats. Our balls were balls that we would hustle at Force Field till the cover came up. Imagine how many valuable baseballs we'd rip the cover off, and then we'd just take it at that time, and we just played there over and over and over again until something happened. When I was 12 years old, the Little League came to town. Until that time, I had never played under a coach or a manager. We sort of ran our own show. And you just went through a kind of, talk about rituals. When you started playing ball, you went out to right field. And as you got a little bigger, a little faster, and a little stronger, you started to move, and eventually you found a position that kind of suited you. And one of the things I love about baseball is that if you look at the positions, there's a body type for every position. I mean, you can play baseball. There's a position out there for you. If you're fast, you're going to play center field. If you're heavy and slow, they're going to put the tools of ignorance on you, and you're going to become a catcher. If you're a big, strong kid, you're going to do what they did in the Little League. They're going to put you on a mound and scare the hell out of everybody who comes to bat, because this big kid is out there throwing the ball. And what did you wear in those days? You wore a flap. That's all you had. It was a flap. It was, the boxing things that they put on. But they weren't padded like that. They were just plastic flaps. That's what you had. So you were these big kids throwing fastballs, didn't you? So I just grew up loving baseball, and I played baseball. And believe me, I could not think of anything in my life that I could do other than play baseball. I figured I'm either going to play baseball or I'm going to be a bum. And I came very close to that prophecy. I just kicked around. High school, I graduated from high school. I could care less about going to college. All I wanted to do was play ball. I played high school baseball. I played sandlot baseball. I kept waiting for somebody to discover me. I aggressive. I tried to be as mean as Ty Cobb. All I noticed was I was an obnoxious kid that was getting in the way of the players they really wanted to look at.
How does James Joyce come into this?
I love language as well. And there's nobody better at language. And I love James Joyce because he's also subversive. He was an Irishman writing in a country that was controlled by England. And he lived his entire life in exile. He was determined to get his revenge on the English by doing all sorts of strange and distorted things in the English language. I love teaching James Joyce because you get what you heard. Nobody knew how to read Ulysses. Nobody knew how to read Finnegan's Wake. I'd go in and teach those books. And people say, wow, is that what's in there? It's like telling you baseball stories. Oh, half the stories I've told you aren't true. Very good story. But anyways, I kicked around. I graduated from high school and kicked around for 5 years. And I was working at Gimbel's warehouse, at Gimbel's department store, as a stock boy. And I was just very fortunate. There was this Italian fellow who was working as a stock boy. I mean, he was not a United States citizen. He was in the country working as a stock boy. And he brought in an article one time from the New York Times because he kept talking about all these books I should read, and these books of philosophy. And he says, "You're too smart to be working as a stock boy. What's wrong with you?" And I said, "Well, what's wrong with you? And why are you here?" And he brought this book, this article from the New York Times, and it was about how artists take jobs like stock boys so they can free their mind. And he said that he was a painter. And he was the one that got me looking into colleges. But believe me, the bug was still there, because when I started looking at colleges, I started looking at colleges that had basketball programs. Because I was playing industrial ball for Gimbel's, I wanted to play basketball. I was going to go to college. I was going to go to college for a good reason. I was going to go to college to play basketball. And so, I mean, you talk about pipe dreams, 5'8", I'm 35 pounds. I'm going to go to college to play basketball. But I'm smart. I looked at the standings of West Virginia teacher colleges. I picked out the worst team in the conference, Edinburgh State College, and I enrolled there, and I was accepted with the one thing that I overlooked. And one of the great tragedies of my life, I forgot to check if they had a baseball team. They had the worst basketball team in the conference, but they had no baseball team. But it all worked out. I went to Edinburgh, and this is how I became an English major. I went to Edinburgh, 1,600 students, got to Crawford Gym for registration my freshman year. I looked around the room, and in those days, there was no phys ed major. All the jocks became social studies majors. It's a fancy word for history, right? And I looked, and there they all were. You know, I figured, oh, you know, these classes, they're going to be smelly. And, you know, they're all male. And I looked over, and there was a line for English majors. And the most beautiful, neurotic women I've ever seen were standing in that line. I just hopped right into it. So I didn't make the basketball team. I did run track. And then, of course, I met, this is my wife, Anita. If you've heard the Reading Baseball series, she's the one who has all the clever lines. To this day, I believe that people listen to the series just to find out what she has to say at the end of the program. But she enrolled at Edinburgh that year, and she was an elementary major. And again, you're getting into cliches here, but the idea was you fooled around with English majors, you married an elementary school teacher. That gives you an idea how far back I go, when that was the thinking during that time. And so we met our freshman year. We danced to Moon River. We dated. She dumped me. I was vice president of her class. She dumped me for the president. I handled it the way I've handled all things all my life. I got mad, pouted, and I didn't talk to her for a year. And finally, we got back together again, and she's probably been regretting it for the rest of her life. Here we are. So that's how I became an English major, just by getting into line with all those beautiful neurotic English majors. And the sports thing didn't work out, and I went on and got an MA and a PhD. Came here in 1969, and when I was in graduate school, I noticed that all the great writers, the writers that I thought were just wonderful, just had such command of language, they were Irish. James Joyce, William Butler Yeats, Sean O'Casey, those were the ones I wanted to teach, those were the ones that I wanted to write about. And the more I was in the English department, the more I taught those writers. And by the time I retired, I was pretty much in Irish studies at that point. I retired in 2001. The baseball turn, try to end this. The baseball turn came about because I had the misfortune of being elected chair of the Department of English at a time when chairs were elected for 3-year terms and nobody could survive 3 years as chair of the English department. Again, it's in my nature. If you tell me that people are feeling at this and they can't stand each other, it's in my nature. What better revenge than to stick it out? So I stuck it out for 9 years. But at a certain point, I felt like Ishmael in Moby Dick. I felt that gray, soggy sinking of my soul, and I had to do something to get out of it. And I found a baseball conference in Cooperstown, and I figured, I love to read, I'll read some baseball books, and I'll see if I can get a paper. And I did, and I went up there, and it was great. We had a great time. I gave a paper. And Annie and I went there. We played. One of the great things about the conference is that after it's over, they play town ball. So we have a chance to play town ball. And when I retired, it was like a second childhood. You know, it was like I could relive all that baseball stuff and actually write about it. So whatever skills I developed in writing and research, I can now do. And this time, instead of James Joyce and William Butler Yeats, it would be Roy Stargell and Roberto Clemente. Instead of Irish Studies, it would be the Pittsburgh Pirates and the St. Louis Cardinals. And I did pay my debt, by the way, Cardinal fans. You know, I edited the Pirates Reader for the University of Pittsburgh Press, and it went very well. It went so well that the University of Missouri Press contacted me and said, would you like to do a St. Louis baseball reader? My first reaction was, no. But I agreed to do it. And it was a great experience because St. Louis has one of the greatest baseball histories in the country. But it took me less than a year to do the Pirates Reader. It took me almost 3 years Because I just didn't want to. I kept struggling with that. I think it all worked out. I think it's a great book. And I can say that because I didn't write it. It's a collection of the greatest writings about St. Louis baseball. I would say its greatest teams, its greatest players, and the writers in there are Hall of Fame writers like Bill Burns and Bob Gregg, and so many other writers. So I've just been lucky. I really have. I mean, to stand here today and talk about this stuff, and have you tolerate me for this length of time, I'm very lucky to be in this position. And this has been going on for about a decade. I've been doing the Radio Baseball series for 10 years. Every time I go in there, I ask them, is it time? I said, I'd like to go out before you bring out the hook at that point. And I'm still writing books. Our son got in touch with me a few months ago, several months ago, and he said, what's the next book, Dad? And I borrowed that classic line, from all those detective movies, and I said, I'm too old for this. I said, I'm too tired. I can't write another book. And he says, well, what about if I come up with a topic and we write a book together? So, okay. We came up with a topic, Barry Bonds. In the 1990s college. Could imagine going from Willie Starr to Barry Bonds? So I said, okay, and we drew up a proposal, and we sent it to the University of Pittsburgh Press, and they sent us a contract. So I'm sitting down these days trying to make Barry Bonds sound human. It's not that, nothing else.
You had started to say something about Itchy and...
Oh, Itchy Jones? Oh, boy, this is...
And Pete Rose.
I know, this is a tale. This is one of those, tales that, out of school tales. Itchy Jones knew Pete Rose was in, well, I can't even say that. Itchy Jones went to the Marion Penitentiary, and he met Pete Rose while he was down there. And I'm going to really clean this up and really keep it simple. I'm going to tell you the things that I think I can tell you. That he did go to Marion Penitentiary. He visited Pete Rose. He won't tell me anything else about that visit. But if you read Pete Rose's My Prison Without Bars, he mentions a baseball coach visiting him in Marion. He mentions the coach as a softball coach. There's no men's softball team at SIU. But Pete Rose says that a male softball coach visited him at, and this is Pete Rose's James Cagney moment in Prison Without Bars. This is why it's so hard to forgive this guy. He says that this coach gave Pete Rose SIU memorabilia. It's in the book, you can read it. He gave Pete Rose memorabilia, SIU cap, baseball, softball cap, jersey, memorabilia. Pete Rose started to wear the memorabilia. It was against prison regulations, so they threw him in solitary for wearing SIU memorabilia. That's the story. And I think I've kept it fairly simple. Right, that's enough of it. I get in trouble if I tell you more about